Over the last couple days, I think the most interesting piece of NFL news has come out of Las Vegas, where finally, at least in my
Yeah,
opinion, they
finally.
cut loose one of, if not the worst coach in the NFL, Josh McDaniels. Finally got fired after a disappointing season and a half with the Raiders,
We no longer
taking
confusingly have two McDaniels in the NFL.
It's true. It's true. The worst McDaniel has gone. They all with that they also fired their GM.
Yeah,
Um, don't remember his first name, but Ziegler.
yeah.
Again, Raiders have just been a complete mess from the coaching
Dave.
standpoint with McDaniel, and then also having Ziegler give out contracts to guys
Some
that
bad ones.
then some bad ones. They go get Jimmy Garoppolo, who's
I
just been
was
a
gonna
complete
say, what did they
disaster.
sign Jimmy G to?
I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but it's way too much.
Is it
That
how long is it?
also,
Do you have any idea?
oh,
I'm looking it up
oh,
right now.
that's a good
Three
question. That's a
years,
good question.
72.5.
Which is insane because another piece of Raiders news is that they just benched him. Um, so there's that move. There's bringing in Devonte Adams, who wanted to play specifically with Derek Carr, and then letting Derek Carr go. So now he wants out. The whole Chandler Jones thing, signing him long term, and then he goes off and loses his mind.
Yeah.
It's just
Although
complete.
that's
That's kind of not on the GM, but still.
yeah.
Um, and it's a whole mess in Las Vegas. And Mark Davis finally said, it's time to go to both of them. What do you think about this move, Simon? And what do you think about where the Raiders are going to go from here?
I don't know. Because when I look at that team, I think that the Raiders are going to be really bad in the next couple years. I think that
Yeah.
they do not have a lot to work with. And I do know a Raiders fan who is very excited about Aiden O'Connell, but the
Hmm.
fact that you're excited about Aiden O'Connell shows how bad your franchise is. Because who knows?
Well, I
Who knows? Who knows? Who knows? Maybe Aiden O'Connell works out.
I don't think he played that bad. I mean, like I'm
Maybe he
looking
works out. Maybe
from
he works
the
out.
one game, the one game that
I'm
Aiden O'Connell
just
played.
saying.
I don't think he played that bad, but I think
But
that's part of the reason McDaniel got fired is because of
are
the
you
inability to play a
Caleb,
guy
are you
like Aiden
saying that you are
O'Connell.
going to save your franchise? It's the same thing as the Flames situation. I don't know if you've been following
Okay,
Twitter in the
okay.
last 2 days and how people have responded to Connor Zari scoring one goal and getting one nice rush up the blue line, and all of a sudden he's the Flames franchise savior. Any situation
But
where you
at
believe
least you're
that a
giving him a
slightly
chance.
above average performance is going to save your
At
franchise
least you're
is
giving
a
a young guy
sign
a
of the
chance. Okay,
situation.
okay, okay. It's not, but it's the thing where it's like you're giving a young guy a chance in a situation like it's the kind of thing because it's why we got to bring it to the Flames. It's why you get so mad at Daryl Sutter because you're just simply not giving young guys a chance. When you're looking at this Raiders team, they have a young guy in Aiden O'Connell who showed a lot of promise, who played really well, almost beat the Chargers. And instead, they're throwing in McDaniels made the decision to throw in a guy like Brian Hoyer. You can
Yeah.
say what you want about Garoppolo. Sure, they started him because they gave him a big contract, whatever. But then when Garoppolo was out, they chose to play a guy like Brian Hoyer over a younger guy like Aiden O'Connell, who is not only better, but has a
Yeah.
significantly higher upside. Is Aiden O'Connell going to turn around the franchise? No. But it's the kind of thing where it's such a no-brainer move to start the young
Is
guy
Hoyer
who has
going to turn
shown
around
more
the
upside.
franchise?
Hoyer is going to sink the franchise. There's a reason they lost to the Bears without Justin Fields, who are playing Tyson Bagent. I think that's what got McDaniels fired more than anything is the inability to a play Aiden O'Connell, who I know Mark Davis really likes, and b that they then lost that game by like 20 points to the completely hapless Bears. It's just like that. That is the first in a long string of just coaching faux pas that Josh McDaniels has had. And sure, it's not going to turn around the whole franchise because I think McDaniels already driven it into a ditch before then. But it's just indicative of the larger problem. And it's the kind of no-brain move that
Yeah.
yes, people applaud it because it's just, oh my God, it's such an obvious move for so long that you're finally getting your shit together and pulling one decent move out of your ass. That's why people get excited about it. And that's why you need to move on from a guy like McDaniels that can't make the obvious decision to play their young talent when they have it.
It is crazy to me that he got a 6 year contract after everything. I also want to
Yeah, so
talk about that because
the Raiders are
I
now
wanted
paying
to
him
point out
and
his
John Gruden.
coaching record. Yeah, that
Oh,
too.
it's terrible.
Yeah, but even before this, do you have a guess for how good he did with the Broncos?
Oh, he was terrible. It's one of the worst coaching stints in the recent history of the league.
Okay, well, I don't know about that. But
It was bad.
11 wins, 17 losses.
It's I think
That's
that
really bad, but like, and I know. I'm just talking about records here. I'm talking about stats. He actually
in
had a
terms of
step down. If you know what, that should show anything, right? If anything. The funny thing that I wanted to point out as well is in the article that I have pulled up on ESPN. The one thing that they do point out is on the merits of their records for McDaniels and Ziegler and the season they'd had so far, they did not deserve to go, is what ESPN says. Because
there's no way.
comparing and they end up turning around towards the second half of the article saying that they believe that maybe there's something else there, like maybe in the room or like something else, another reason.
No.
And their argument, I'm going to tell you their argument before you go off here. There was that they had John Gruden in his first stint his second stint with the Raiders, sorry. He went 11-21 to start it. Kyle Shanahan with the 49ers started off his stint 10-22. Dan Campbell, who started his Lions career 4-19-1, and since has gone 13-4. Like that's the argument that they use, is that maybe it's too early.
That is why you can't just use stats and wins to determine
Yeah.
how good a coach is, because that ignores all of the context from guys like Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell inherited a terrible Lions team. That Lions team was absolutely god-awful, one of the worst teams in the league. And he started that bad because he had a bad roster, and they're in the middle of the rebuild. So, yeah, it's fine that he went 4-19 or whatever, because that was not the expectation. Josh McDaniels inherited a Raiders team that people forget was actually pretty decent. You have a guy like Devontae Adams from the very start. You have stars on defense like Max Crosby and Chandler Jones. They had a good roster. They were turning it around. You look at the guy who immediately preceded him after John Gruden got the axe for being like racist and homophobic or whatever.
Yeah.
Rich Bisaccia, where he was an interim coach and he took this team and they played their asses off under him, and they did amazingly well. I believe they made it to the playoffs. If they didn't make it to the playoffs, they were like a game short. I think that might have been the season where they lost to the Chargers in the last game, but they made it incredibly close, or they made the playoffs. I don't remember what it is, and I can't verify that right now. The point is they played their asses off under Bisaccia, and then as soon as McDaniels takes the reins, it's a nosedive. That is the context that differs for all of those guys. Again, Kyle Shanahan is another example. He had a similar record because that Niners team was terrible. It was the Niners teams under Chip Kelly and Jim Tomsula that were just completely treading water. I saw that for so many years being a Seahawks fan, where I just chalked the Niners up to a free win on their schedule. Like it takes time to build that. McDaniels already had a roster like that, and he got worse from what was there before him. And he also already has a record that proves that he is a bad coach in Denver.
Yeah, and even to talk about Dan Campbell again, like, sure, his record was like the complete opposite, because every single offseason, like, this is his third year now, I believe, and I remember both of those off seasons when the Lions sucked. I remember personally, I was like, please don't fire Dan Campbell. Don't fire Dan Campbell. That'll be such a mistake. Because even with the losing records, I think we all knew that getting rid of Dan Campbell would be the biggest mistake that the Lions could possibly make, because he was not the problem. Like, you could even tell just from the outside how good of a coach Dan Campbell is. And I think even with Kyle Shanahan, you can say a similar thing where we can, like, as Seahawks fans, I think we can admit that Kyle Shanahan is an excellent coach. And John Gruden, piece of shit, all that aside, was a good coach in his prime. Like, so it feels weird to make that comparison. I agree with you. I just wanted to point it out because it is sitting right in front of me and I found it kind of interesting. But one thing that I wanted to ask you, because I saw someone calling for this, and I'm curious what your opinion on this as a Seahawks fan is. People are asking for Marshawn Lynch to come in and coach the Raiders.
I saw that.
Yeah.
You do a better job than Josh McDaniels. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, players would want to play for Marshawn Lynch.
Yeah, Marshawn Lynch is not a coach, though.
Like, of course not.
I don't think he'd want to, first of all. But then, like, I I remember this clip that went around. I saw him talking to Pete Carroll, and Pete's doing his best. He's trying to coach up Marshawn. He's like talking about run gaps and everything, and Marshawn just tells him, "Yo, Pete, like I see a hole, I hit it. I'll just read it." I think that's all he said is, "I'll just read it. I'll just read it." And then Pete keeps talking, and then he just says, "I'll just read it." And then eventually Pete's like, "Yeah, no, it's Marshawn Lynch. He'll be fine.
Yeah.
He'll just read it." That's the kind of guy that Marshawn is. Marshawn, like he people would want to play for him. I don't know how well he's going to actually do in the coaching role.
No,
but
I agree with you. I just wanted to throw it out
better than Josh McDaniels. He still do better than Josh McDaniels because I think players wanting to play for you is a huge thing, and I can tell that nobody wanted to play for Josh McDaniels.
It's the
like,
Ted Lasso effect.
Seeing, oh yeah, it totally is. It totally is. I think that's a big thing, especially from a head coach, because like when you're looking at strategy, that's more on the play caller side. Obviously, the head coach has some influence in that.
Yeah.
But it's about bringing the team together under like a common culture. That's what the head coach's like main job is, and that's why you see guys like Pete Carroll have such sustained success. Even like Bill Belichick, you may say, but that's like a thing where he's so strict on his players, guys don't want to play for him. I don't think that's true. I think part of the reason he's done so well is people want to play for him, even though he's strict. It's a dedication to winning, and they have built a great culture there in terms of everybody having their own responsibilities and knowing that it's all for a common goal. I don't think they have that, because when you try to, this is the issue with all the Belichick disciples, is when you try to instill a culture like that in a place where there's constant losing.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. I think that there are a lot of things that definitely led to the McDaniels firing, and maybe the record isn't the right way to look at it. I think even if you could maybe look at it as him not necessarily having a lot of time to get it all figured out, I think we all knew that this was going to happen. Whether it happened now or at the end of the season or at some point next year, it felt like McDaniels was never going to be the permanent fix for this team.
Yeah, and it's a good thing you pointed out, because it's like it is a sign of how poor it was going because of how early in the season we are for when he's fired. Yeah. We're only like 8 games in.
It's not very common that we see this. Like, I mean, the last time I can remember it happening is Myers, right? Like, he's the big example of it. Where he was fired fairly
lasted
early.
Longer than this. I mean, I guess not overall, but into the season he lasted longer. Yeah, I think it was getting into like week 13 before they axed Urban Meyer.
Was it?
I think it was pretty. I think he made it pretty far into the season before they axed him.
It didn't
8 games
feel.
Into the season is pretty, because when you axe your coach, like it's a pretty hard reset for a football team when they're like already
you're right.
Midway through the season.
He got fired after. Oh wow, dead on 13 games.
Memory like a steel trap, but which makes sense. And I mean, like Urban Meyer firing, I think it was still worse. I think Urban Meyer is still a worse coach, obviously, because Urban Meyer got fired that far into his first year. Josh McDaniels at least made it through one before getting axed midway through the season. But yeah, it is comment on how just terrible this Raiders season is going. Well, I think people didn't have very high expectations for them, and their record actually isn't that bad. Again, it's the kind of thing where record doesn't tell you anything. Because I'm listening to my favorite NFL podcast, Around the NFL. One of the guys on there said, like, yeah, the Raiders are 3-5, but they feel like a 1-7 team. That's kind of what this Raiders.
Well, and that's very true as well. Where like I thought that they were doing way worse. Like
yeah, they're 3-5. They're 3-5. It's not terrible.
No,
if they had one more game, they'd be 500 and be in the midst of the playoff race. But it's not. That's not how it feels. That's not how it feels.
Wow. So this is a comment that I've just been scrolling through the rest of this article because I didn't get a chance to read all of it. This is an interesting quote to me that I wanted to bring up to you. And I'm curious what you think on this. I think that between me and you definitely have more of the football knowledge on, especially head coaches, regarding a topic like this. And the exact quote is, outside of maybe Urban Meyer, there is a pretty strong case to be made that McDaniels is the worst head coaching hire of the past 2 decades.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, because I think I would even say it's worse than Urban Meyer. Okay. For not because of performance. Let's say that. I think that it's a distinction that needs to be made between head coaching hire and head coaching like performance. Urban Meyer is
Yeah.
by far the worst. Again, he's going off and getting lap dances in a Jacksonville bar by week 5. That was the worst like head coach performance of all time.
Yeah. And that
But it wasn't the
Jacksonville team
worst.
was terrible as well.
It was. And it's like, I don't think that was the worst head coaching hire of all time. Hire is in a decision made by the owner for a guy to hire. Because Urban Meyer, as bad as he was, he had a resume. He had had so many great seasons at Ohio State. Like, he was considered like a great college coach. He had the results to back it up. So it's like, sure, it turned out terrible, but people can see why they made that decision. With Josh McDaniels, it's like this guy has already proven to you that he's a terrible head coach with his stint on the Denver Broncos, then goes back to New England. Like, he's a fine offensive coordinator, but he's also coordinating an offense that had the greatest quarterback of all time, which
Yeah.
gives you a huge leverage, and then
Who
also
was probably
the
calling a
greatest head
lot of his
coach
own
all time.
plays.
Probably calling a lot of his own plays, and then you also had the greatest head coach of all time. And then there's also the thing about how Belichick disciples never work out outside of like Brian Dable. And then there's also the thing where you had Josh McDaniels got hired as the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts, and then he weaseled his way out of it. He committed to it, and then at the last second, he said, "I'm not going to be the head coach of the Colts. I'm going back to New England." So he's already shown that he's kind of this like skeevy guy who can just
Yeah.
worm his way out of these job opportunities. And then the Colts had to ultimately kind of backpedaled into a better coach in Frank Reich. But then you look at the Raiders, where, okay, this is why I say it's the worst coaching hire of all time. You have all of that information on McDaniels that can prove that he's a terrible head coaching hire, and then you also get dropped into your lap a guy like Rich Bisaccia, who has just led the Raiders on this incredible turnaround after they hadn't started the season very well under
Yeah.
John Gruden. They went on a run, and again, I don't remember if they actually made the playoffs, but they either made it or were very close. They go on an amazing run under Bisaccia, and there's tons of people, including players, calling for the Raiders to just make him the permanent coach. And instead of getting this guy that the players love and has had consistent results, you go for this guy who has one of the worst coaching resumes in NFL
Yeah.
history.
Well,
That
to
is why I
speak
think that is the worst
to
coaching
speak on that
hire in the
resume,
last 20 years.
I think that I did not know enough about McDaniel's time with the Broncos because holy crap.
This is
Like,
why,
I
America
just-
doesn't
I-
tell you everything.
I just read a whole paragraph on it. Holy smokes. I like how? And I just want to read this last section of it before he got fired. Cuz even this just shows like how bad it was. McDaniels traded a future first round pick to the Seahawks for a second round pick and used it on defensive back Alfonso Smith, who lasted one season with the team before being traded for Dan Gronkowski. The Seahawks then used that first round pick on Earl Thomas. McDaniels was also fined for videotaping a 49ers practice in London. Reportedly, he told his players he could turn any high school quarterback into an All-Pro, and started 6-0 before finishing his Broncos career by losing 12 of the next 17 games. Holy crap. That is just the end, by the way. I could go into the beginning is more about like Jay Cutler and Tim Tebow, which I feel like everybody's heard already. But that's more the stuff that I didn't know. And it's wow. How do you hire that guy? What are you doing?
Yep.
If I knew that, I would have been
Yep.
like, "What the fuck? Why are you bringing this
It's
guy
like-
back?"
Everybody already knew it was a stupid decision the moment it happened. Like, I don't know how this experiment lasted this long. It's such a good, like, if I'm a Raiders fan right now, I am over the moon. Like, I'm over the moon.
Yeah.
And you hope Mark Davis can find a guy. Like, I don't think we'll see Antonio Pierce as their new interim guy.
Yeah.
He's giving a speech
lot of
about
people
like
have
touching
already
his
liked him.
players and
Yeah.
yeah. He seems like a player's coach, which is what they need. I think he'll be better than McDaniels, but I don't know. Maybe they'll be looking somewhere else after, which will be interesting. The bar is very low, considering the two Raiders coaches they currently have on payroll for the next 5 years. But it'll be interesting to see where it goes. Again, finally for Raiders fans, they get to see hopefully competent coaching.
I don't know
and
how
hopefully
bright
they
the
get some
future is
sort of
anyway,
turnaround.
though. Yeah,
It's rough, and
they
you know
don't
why
have a
it's
lot
rough?
of talent
It's
on
because
the
of-
team, and they
it's because
definitely
of
don't have a lot of
McDaniel
young
and
talent.
Ziegler. Yeah,
Yeah.
They've been a dumpster fire for the last few years. There was hints of them being good, and that started under Gruden, and then it kind of peaked under Bisaccia, and then it's just been all downhill from there. They remember
Yeah.
they had a good roster at one point, but it's gone all downhill from there. Especially at the quarterback position. I think they wasted Derek Carr's prime.
For sure. No, I agree with that. I think there was a point in the NFL where Derek Carr was definitely a very confident quarterback, and they did not give him many weapons before Devontae Adams. Which at that point you can argue he was already out of his prime. So
Yeah, I would. Yeah.
yeah. Well, anyway, unless they can rely on getting all of Jacobs' kids out on the field, I don't think they're gonna have a lot of success. At least young talent wise. So I think we might not be seeing a lot of contending from the Raiders in the next 10 years. Unless Aiden McDaniels is literally Tom Brady.
Aiden O'Connell.
What did I say?
Aiden McDaniels.
Aiden McDaniels, baby! You know what? Throw McDaniels out there at quarterback. Bring him back. I miss him already.
Oh, God. Oh, God.
Wow.